Welcome to Gut Heroes, where we look at how better gut and microbiome health can help you beat pain, increase your energy levels and focus, and help you thrive. Coming up in this episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Gut Heroes. In this episode, I really wanted to look at a bit of a roundup of some of the news I found interesting in the last week or so. This one is going to be mainly related to ankylosing spondylitis, and that's the condition I have. And it's an autoimmune disease, and there's lots of information out there, and I sometimes find it useful to highlight some of that information which talks about issues that involve our condition or just articulate things in a way which I think are helpful. So I think the best thing to do is just dive in. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was this article here from Gemma Newman. Really good little piece, just highlighting something that's really frustrating, actually. It's this idea that ankylosing spondylitis mainly affects males or only affects males, and it's a really outdated misnomer, really. It doesn't. It affects both sexes. There have been more recent studies to show that the difference in numbers is much, much closer to parity than we once thought. And it's sad to read this, actually, where she had the experience of going to a doctor and it was kind of almost dismissed because she's female. And her experience was that they said, well, this is a man's disease, so you probably don't have that. I think even if it was something that mainly affected men or, affected the vast majority of men, that's really, really sad that we're in a situation like that, because even if the figures were sort of 99% men, 1% women, we should definitely be still not ruling that out. And I find that quite shocking that she had to go through this. So that's a real shame, but it's great that she's highlighting this. So for anyone here who thinks they might have ankylosing spondylitis, but comes up against that wall of outdated information that says this is only men who get this, please talk to your doctor, get down that diagnosis journey, because the sooner you find out about something like this, the quicker you can, get relief and take action. So I just wanted to highlight that one because I thought that was a nice, well-written article. And as she says further down, her own sister went through the same issues. And an interesting point, I'm just going to quote here. The other problem is that AS can present differently for males and females. I had mostly peripheral joint or anesthesis issues, probably pronounced that wrong. Doctors were looking at my spine scans and telling me, you can't have AS. I was told I was imagining things or I'm being a hypochondriac. That is such a common thing for people with AS to have that experience of being told that it's all in your head. Something I went through as well. And it took me 19 years to get a diagnosis. And it's just, there's no bad intention from the medical professionals, but we really need to change the narrative on this because it's really, really damaging. And people are not getting diagnosed and more damage is being done to their joints, to their spine. So we've got to just dispel this myth and get just better information out there to medical professionals who are dealing with this on the front line. So thank you to Gemma for posting that article. I think that's really helpful for people. And I'll share a link to everything I'm talking about in the show notes. The next one I wanted to look at was clinical challenges, early disease in axial spondyloarthritis. So axial spondyloarthritis, same as AS or ankylosing spondylitis, broadly speaking, just a different way of phrasing it. And the reason I wanted to just share this one with you is I thought it was quite nicely written. So I'm just going to scroll down a bit. Yeah, I found this little paragraph here interesting. Infection also has been postulated as playing a triggering role. There has long been a history implicating particular types of infections in the pathogenesis of axial spondyloarthritis. Recent research has suggested that sources of infections can include skin damage in patients with psoriasis and intestinal mucosa for patients with IBD manifestations. So these are things which, if you have had AS for a long time, or you're aware of some of the biology, you'll probably be nodding your head and go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because a lot of people will have a comorbidity or so, other symptoms that go along with the more traditional back pain issues, and typically they can include things like skin complaints, psoriasis, irritable bowel syndrome. There's a kind of spectrum of autoimmune problems and gut problems and skin problems that can all not necessarily commingle, but kind of cohabit with something like AS. So I just thought that was quite interesting, the way that was phrased there, and the idea of infection potentially as being something that can trigger something, so that a disease like AS can sort of go over that edge and become more active, or become, really to the point where it's diagnosed and it's something that really affects someone. And then the paragraph below this as well: intestinal dysbiosis has been an area of intense interest in the development of ANKSPONs, with 10% of patients having clinical IBD and up to 70% of patients showing at least subclinical inflammation of the gut. Research into end-stage ankylosing spondylitis has shown that the normal tight junctions between the epithelial cells of the intestine are loosened, resulting in a permeable, leaky gut. That allows pathogens and microbial antigens to enter the bloodstream, ultimately reaching the enthesis where immune reaction is triggered. This leads to secretion of pro-inflammatory cytokines and upregulation of inflammatory pathways. So apologies if I've pronounced some of those terms badly. I'm sure I have. This is kind of like a bit of a buzzword bingo, and it's interesting because often when people think about autoimmune disease and the gut and diet, there's sometimes a bit of an eyeball rolling where they think, the things we eat and the gut is very different from this sort of heavily labelled thing which you must treat with drugs that have been prescribed by someone in a white coat. Medicine is amazing and often life-saving, and we should always listen to our doctors. But what this is describing here, intestinal dysbiosis, so that's the idea that in your gut you have all of these microbes, and microbial or microbiota make up somewhere in the region of 50% of the cells in your body. So half of you is made up of microbiota. So that's bacteria, all these other things, a wide range of different organisms in your body. And dysbiosis literally means that things are out of whack. So if you have a sort of healthy population balance, then your immune system isn't going to get triggered, and hopefully things are going to be fine. And the next stage kind of describes how things get a bit more complicated. So they're talking about tight junctions between the epithelial cells of the intestine, loosened, leaky gut, etc., etc. So if you picture your gut as having this kind of lining or sort of shield on the edge of it, basically what they're saying is that with 70% of patients, they're seeing there are little gaps in this shield. So when you have that combination of dysbiosis, so an unhappy gut population, unbalanced, and then you have gaps in the gut itself, then you've got sort of madness happening in and outside of the gut. And the immune system is then really overreacting, or not overreacting, but just they're having to fight battles on many, many fronts. And that's when you are getting a lot of these really crippling symptoms for people with autoimmune disease, and in this case, ankylosing spondylitis. So I just thought that paragraph was interesting to share with you. I just wanted to decode some of the terms, because they are terms I'm going to use a lot in this podcast, and they are so, to my mind, so crucial to understanding how a lot of the problems we face in modern society, and in particular with autoimmune disease, how they come about, and more importantly, how we can tackle them and how we can look at them and see them as root cause rather than something that has to be there and just treated only with really strong drugs. I think there are things you can do to modify your lifestyle which really can help with some of these things and help you rebuild and help ease some of those symptoms. Okay, and the next article I wanted to look at was from a celebrity, Mick Mars, celebrity is the wrong word, musician, from Motley Crue, a band I've been lucky enough to see a couple of times. And this, I kind of shared this made me feel quite sad, actually. It's amazing in the sense that he's very motivated to get stuff out there. You know, he's been suffering with Ankylosing for a long time, and this quote here, Mars says he's pushing through literal bone fusions in his body to get his art out there. And for anyone with ankylosing spondylitis, this is something that's very real. It's when you have a lot of inflammation, which we do, and it's attacking the joints, and it's often around the spine, particularly the sacroiliac joints. You have inflammation. If this happens repeatedly, there's scarring, and then this scarring can turn to bone tissue, and that's what Mick is referring to here. So he's talking about how this disease for him is being incredibly progressive, and he's effectively turning to bone, and that's part of this condition. I really believe, from the experience I've had recently over the last few years of really taking hold of and managing my own AS, that there are things we can do to mitigate this. And I feel like, in my case and in the case of many other people, that it's not reversing, but I feel better than I have done for 20 years. And I feel really sad to read this, that, you know, he's talking about he just has a feeling that he's not going to live much longer and all this kind of stuff. And this is a awful thing for anyone to have, and I just don't want anyone to give up hope, because if my own experience and the experience of a lot of people I've connected with is anything to go by, there are some incredible things we can do to help manage this, and not all of them are, you know, very strong medications with side effects. They can be used in conjunction with that, or, you know, I'm not taking any medication at all, and I promise you, I haven't felt this good since I was 25. And the reason I set this up is because I want to share everything I can, especially when there's science-based evidence, but also the things I'm testing and keeping really rigorous records on. I want to share that with you, and if it helps, is the things you can try yourself, then that's all I want, really. But, you know, it's helpful to know that you're not alone. There are lots of people going through this, and it could affect absolutely anyone. So sorry to read that from Mick Mars, but he's got incredible motivation and courage, and that's one thing this condition gives you. You know, if you can battle on despite what this throws at you, you really can do anything. And my goal is to make the pain bit less and the progression bit non-existent as far as possible. So we'll finish on a bit of a brighter note, or more an informative note. I just found this article quite interesting. Rheumatism, characteristic of a group of diseases. Something that I think is often confusing for people who don't have an autoimmune disease or who are unfamiliar with AS is that, you know, I'll typically say I have a form of arthritis, because everyone's heard of that. You know, they might have a grandmother, for example, that's the most typical, who will have suffered with arthritis, and they'll have this kind of idea that, oh yeah, she had, you know, pain in their knuckles and so on and so forth. So yes, AS is a form of arthritis, but there are different forms of arthritis, and this just describes two classifications, really, which I think is quite helpful. So it talks about the non-autoimmune version, and that is things like osteoarthritis, and then it talks about what we have, which is the autoimmune version. And I'll just kind of summarize really what it's saying. So osteoarthritis, I like to think of this as being a bit like a clock or a car or some kind of machine, where the different joins or the cogs have just been rubbing together over time, like wear and tear that you would expect. And that is causing kind of damage and erosion, and that over time is causing problems and inflammation. And that is when you're getting the symptoms of that kind of arthritis. Now, I'm oversimplifying it here, but that's generally kind of the idea with that. So that is osteoarthritis. So that's the kind of the non-autoimmune as they're putting it here. And then you have autoimmune arthritis. So this is rheumatoid arthritis, and ankylosing spondylitis is a form of that. Ours tends to affect joints connected to the spine, so the sacroiliac joints and the ribs and so on. It can affect knees and other joints as well. But what is happening here is it's more that the immune system is attacking these areas. So as they put it here, result when the body produces antibodies that attack its own joints, muscles, and connective tissue. So I just thought that was quite a nice way they phrase that, and it hopefully gives some clarity to anyone who might be new to this condition, or they have a loved one who wants to know how it works. And the whole idea, which I want to talk about and investigate and share information with Gut Heroes, is, you know, the majority of your immune system is in your gut. Around 70% is in your gut. And so are the vast majority of the microbiota, the non-human cells. So things like bacteria, the majority of them live in your gut. How can we stop the situation where your body's producing these antibodies that attack its own joints? Well, my own experience, and increasingly what a lot of studies are showing, is that if you try and stop the dysbiosis, so if you try and rebalance the populations, and also if you look at targeting some of those bacteria or microbes which might be triggering your immune system, then you can sometimes get incredible relief. And so that's one of the overarching ideas with Gut Heroes, is just let's focus on that. You know, this is a relatively new area of science where we're learning more every day. You know, this has been something like 20 years where this has really come to the forefront. And I'm really excited to share what I learned with you here. So I hope you found that useful. That was just a few bits and pieces I picked up recently, which I wanted to share, and I will be in touch soon.